Hi, good morning. This is Damon Scott, Marketing Director here at PVBS. I want to thank everyone for joining us on our introduction to Microsoft Dynamics NAV for government contractors. Today we're going to be providing an overview of the Microsoft Dynamics NAV for government contractors, which is a fully integrated business management solution. We're going to be covering a few things in our presentation today. The executive dashboard will be one that Paul will cover, as well as our fully integrated web time and expense system. We'll talk about the project setup, which includes billing setup and managing funding. We'll also get into invoicing, invoice formats, and managing indirect rates. As we begin, we have a little housekeeping to take care of. So this webinar is being recorded, and it will be posted to our PVBS YouTube account later today. And if you have any questions as we go along, please post those into the question section, and we'll try to get to those as we go. If we cannot get to your question, we'll try to contact you separately to answer that. Also, later today, you should receive an email invitation to take a post-webinar survey. We would really appreciate any feedback that you can provide to us. We want to make this a better learning tool for everyone. So please take a few minutes and answer some questions for us. We appreciate that. Okay, let's see here. So our agenda today is a brief introduction about PVBS, and then we're going to jump right into a demonstration of the product. And again, as we're able to, we will answer questions as we go along. So please just post those there. Let's see. About PVBS, we are a top-tier Microsoft Business Solutions partner serving only the government contracting market. Our headquarters are just outside Washington, D.C. in Reston, Virginia, which gives us a unique access and insight into the GovCon community. Also as an experienced leader with over 12 years of success in the government contracting market and an intelligent innovator with Microsoft systems, PVBS is a direct resource to both government contractors and the Microsoft community. So Microsoft Dynamics NAV for government contractors from PVBS is a rich, robust accounting solution, compliant with federal rules and regulations, providing complete integration and ease. Again, we're going to cover all that so you'll get to see it. Here at PVBS, we are driven to develop excellence in providing the most comprehensive solution to our customers and our partnership channels. And with that brief introduction, I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Paul Skirpsky, our VP of Sales and Marketing here, and one of the partners with PVBS. So, Mr. Skirpsky, I'll turn it over to you, sir, and welcome.
All right. Thanks, Damon, and welcome to everybody on the phone. We appreciate you taking a little time out of your day to learn a little more about what Microsoft Dynamics NAV can do for government contractors. And just to add a little bit to what Damon said, our clients, again, they're focused on doing work with the federal government, but they also often have commercial component to their business. And these organizations are typically either providing professional services, they're product distributors to the government, or they're actually manufacturing products, so contract manufacturing for the government. In each of those three verticals, we have strong solutions to help companies to be more efficient as it relates to financial and operational processes, and also around the reporting side. So folks that aren't familiar with Microsoft Dynamics, Microsoft has created this business through two acquisitions. One of a company called Great Plains Software, the second an organization called Navision Software. Navision being the larger of the two acquisitions. Microsoft, they invested about $1.6 billion. This was about 12 years ago into this acquisition. They ended up with 4 different products, with Microsoft Dynamics NAV being the one that's most widely used, not only within Microsoft, but any mid-market accounting business software product. Microsoft Dynamics NAV is the most widely used. So there's 110,000 companies worldwide using it. There's over 4,000 partners like PVBS, but what makes us unique is our focus on government contracting. In Microsoft, they've declared that we are the go-to partner related to Dynamics NAV for government contractors. And we're excited about that, and also our deep relationship with Microsoft. All right, so this gives you a little bit of an idea in terms of Microsoft. Their go-to-market strategy is all through partners. And what they've decided to do is really have partners that have a vertical focus. And as we mentioned, our organization focused on government contracting. This is a slide from Microsoft. And you may have noticed on a slide earlier that Damon had something in regards to CFMD, or Certified for Microsoft Dynamics. And what that means is the things that we've done to improve Dynamics NAV, it's actually certified and tested by Microsoft, and then we incorporate it into the base solution. And then they promote it as a certified solution that works fully integrated inside of the Dynamics NAV solution. All right, so
I'm going to turn this over to you, Paul. Switch over to your computer.
Okay.
So as I do that, again, I know we have some things going on, so move it over to Paul. There you go.
All right, excellent. All right, so now we're going to get right into the product. And really today is not meant as a training session. It's meant as an introduction. And if you do have questions, like Damon mentioned, on the right-hand side, you'll see the question panel. Feel free to post a question in there, and we'll either cover it if it makes sense during the presentation, or we'll cover some of those questions at the end. If we can't get to your question, we promise that we will follow up with you afterwards and cover that topic with you. So what I want to do is start out with a little general overview, and what you're looking at is the home page for Microsoft Dynamics NAV, and I'm logged in as a certain role. So there's two pieces. There's what they call a role-tailored client, which is the way that I'm logged in right now as an accounting manager. And there's also role-based security. So the role-tailored client tells me what I see in my interface. Role-based security defines what I can actually do when I'm logged in. Can I read, write, modify, delete, execute, permissions across all the fields and tables inside the application. So as an accounting manager, things that I might be interested in seeing are key activities that my team performs or I perform. For instance, invoices that need to get created, expense reports to be processed, timesheet corrections that need to be reviewed. Each one of these visual cues or stacks, I can drill into them to get into additional details. So when I drill into that expense report that needs to be processed, you can see the details of it, who submitted it, what was the travel for, and when was the travel. And you can see that it's currently in approved status. When I open up this document, I can see all the details of the expense report, including who actually approved it and when they approved it. So that is my approval chain that went through in this process. And then any type of attachments related to it. These would be your receipts typically that may have been attached by the employee that was going through the process to travel. Accounting now has the last step in the process, which is once they review it, they can turn that expense report into a purchase invoice and go ahead and pay your employee. So the idea of that home page is those key processes and key information that you need on a regular basis, have it right at your fingertips. In addition, you can see integration with my Outlook component. Each one of these little boxes, so this box of activities, or in this case there's a PO status view, they're all configurable. So as an end user, if I did not want to see my inbox, I can actually hide that information if needed. The top right-hand corner, I call this the My section, so you can see my key jobs that I'm interested in tracking. I can add and remove as necessary here. I can also see my jobs in terms of reports that I'm planning to process. So I can schedule key reports that I'd like to run, identify when I'm planning to have those run, and then once they are, they'll show up in my report inbox. The My Jobs section, it allows me to track those key jobs that are relevant to my role. So if I'm a billing clerk, these might be the 4 jobs I'm responsible for managing. When I actually drill into it, I see all the details of this job. So I'm going to go later on into how you set up a job. But while I'm here, I'll talk about the status box. And the status box provides some KPIs on this record. So information about contract and funded value, direct labor hours, AR balance, billings. Each one of these values, I can actually drill into it to get to the additional detail. So when I drill into the AR balance, it shows me for this job, here's the 5 open AR entries for this particular job. If I need to get additional details on them, I can actually hit the Navigate button, and what Navigate allows me to do is everything related to it. I can pull up the original invoice that was posted to create the AR, look at the general ledger entries that were created, the customer ledger, that's the AR entry I'm on now, also the job ledger. So what was billed when we actually generated that invoice. I can drill into the remaining amount, which is going to tell me what has been applied to that original invoice. So in this case, there was a payment that got applied for $1,000. If I want to know details about that, I can actually pull up, in this case, the bank account. About that particular record. If I go into the department list, this gives me an idea of the overall modules that are available in the system. So in this case, you can see financial management, which is my GL, cash management, AP, AR, and fixed assets, sales order processing, purchase order management. Today, we're going to spend our time on the project side. We also have webinars we put on related to products, so whether you resell or produce products. Because we're focused on the project side today, one of the key components is the web time and expense system. So all fully integrated, this is the place that all of your employees and potentially subcontractors and consultants are going to go to enter time, enter expenses, potentially purchase requisitions, and approval of those different documents. I'm going to go through a couple examples related to that. In addition to all the information that we've gone through in terms of modules and processes, one of the things that you'll see is every module in the system is going to have a series of reports. So in this case, on the project side, information about AR by project, bookings, billing information, job revenue summary, job status, labor detail. So every module is going to have a series of reports, including within the financial management component, there's full budgeting and financial reporting, all designed in a way that financial people can develop their own views. So these particular financial reports, they're designed in a way that accountants can actually build them out. So non-technical people can build, variations of their income statement, balance sheet to show more or less detail as needed. In addition to the reports inside the system, Dynamics NAV leverages the back-end database, which is SQL Server, to build out data cubes so you can build dashboards. So whether you want to use Excel as your front end or other types of business intelligence tools as the front end, these are some examples and a starting point for all clients that actually want to use Excel. They can leverage these financial and project views. So this view is a business overview showing me a trend of revenue, profit, and AR. I'm just choosing the period in terms of the month and the year that I want to run this for. Balance sheet with key metrics over to the right. Income statement, cash flow, and then different indirect rate views. So this indirect rate view, if you've got cost type work, it's showing a monthly trend of how your rates are performing. Each of the rates, actual compared to provisional, and then a current period and year-to-date view of your rates. So each one of these views can be made available to folks that are either in finance or the executive team, so then they can actually see performance, not even having to be a user of the accounting system. In addition, I mentioned the project views. The project views are going to show you more of an operational view of the organization and information. So income statement by project or task, a labor analysis view. So it's going to show me by project and the tasks that I select, how many hours are being charged each month. Overall project detail, so this GL detail on a project is showing me all of my both direct and indirect costs that have been applied, so it's more of a cost analysis view. Again, same type of filters available. Then the project spend is a combination of a project income statement. So if I look in the body of the report, it's showing me monthly overall revenue, a trend of my operating expenses, including indirect costs, net income or loss, and then also what was spent. So the spent is related to the funding. So you can see that there's no value that was keyed in here. It's just looking into this data cube at a measure called total spent, filtered by, in this case, periods, projects, and tasks. Over to the right, it's a trend of my burn rate. Then based on the last 3 months, the system divides that by remaining funding to give me a little bit of a projection of how many months of funding are available based on continuing at the same rate. The idea here is to get more of a real-time picture into people that need to make good decisions on the business. So that's kind of a general overview of the system and overall capabilities. Now what we'll do is we'll go through more of a day in the life of how people use it and how this type of information is captured. So, Damon, before we do that, let's just take a quick poll.
Actually, I don't have a poll set up.
Okay, all right. Well, actually, all right.
I thought it was an automatic thing, but.
All right. Yeah. So let's go ahead and we're going to hop right into setting up projects and how that type of information is tracked from a billing and revenue perspective. The first one we're going to focus on here is going to be a cost type project, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the capabilities there from a setup and tracking perspective. What you're seeing on the general tab is information related to the overview on this. So internal job number, description of the work, who is the client that the work is being performed for. So anytime you see this little caret down, it means I'm looking into a list. So this looks into a list of all of the customers. So the customers are stored in a separate table. In this case, I select my customer, Department of Defense. It fills in all the key information about that customer. Under the contact field, this is the functional contact on this project. So when I select from that list, you're going to see all the contacts we have at Department of Defense. You select that contact, and now it assigns it to this particular project or job. What type of client it is. So whether it's commercial, federal, state, and local government, we use that information for the incurred cost submission. Then over to the right, you got information about, the period of performance, the PM on that project, etc. Under the posting tab, this is more the financial guts of the project. So details regarding how revenue gets recognized, and there's default formulas, but also there's configuration options. So if you'd like to recognize revenue, say on a T&M using more cost type principles, you've got that flexibility to do that. The billing formula, and in this case on a cost plus fixed fee, in terms of the billing pool group, this is related to your indirect rates. So if you've got a corporate rate structure that you're using the provisional rate to bill based upon, you would just select your company pool, but you could have other variations. So oftentimes on contracts these days, there are scenarios where on certain tasks or on an entire job, you can't apply your G&A to travel, or there is not full recovery of G&A. So that billing pool group allows you to define from an indirect perspective how they get applied on this job for billing purposes. In terms of the fee percent, on a cost plus fixed fee, this is your profit on each one of those cost elements related to that particular job. In this example, I've got 5% on labor, 2% on travel. Once you have that setup complete, you can assign it to any job and define how that fee gets recovered. Same idea in terms of withholding. The fee amount, this is related to if you have a fee on hours versus a fee on dollars, you can identify what that fee amount is. On the contract tab, this is information related to the contract vehicle that this work is being performed under. So if you have an IDIQ, the idea would be this primary contract number would be related to the IDIQ. So whether you're on the seaport contract or you have other type of government-wide, agency, or department-wide vehicles, you can assign it to this work. And now if I want to do the analysis to know how much work is being performed under a certain vehicle, I can do that by making this assignment. Who is the contracting office and paying office related to the work being performed. So this is kind of the high-level picture. And now below the work is the work breakdown structure. So this would be related to cost tracking and revenue tracking on this job. So we'll go ahead and pull up that work breakdown structure and talk a little bit about the capabilities here. What you're able to see here is the roll-up levels, and as you expand it, you can see levels beneath it. The WBS is a 60-character alphanumeric field, so it allows for quite a deep WBS structure. Within that WBS, you can see any of those charging or cost levels. They can be mapped to a certain CLIN or ACRN. And within that charging level, you can see the contract or funded value. The contract or funded value can be set at the charging level. So in this example, my charging level is level 2, and we've got funding at level 2. So what that means is that this funding of 150 or 137,000 for requirements, that funding can only be used for requirements. If I set my funding at level 1, it would mean that all levels below can leverage that funding. So it allows you to support all sorts of complex scenarios related to funding and how that funding is used. On each of these levels where you see the contract and funded value, this value could be made up of one or multiple modifications. So when I'm on the setup task 001-02, when I hit modification detail here, it's going to show me all of the details of changes of mods to the contract funded value or a mod to the period of performance. If you need to make an additional mod, if I hit function F8, it can copy the line above it, or I can just type it in if I want. So I could say mod number 34. What was the effective date of the mod? So I can use my calendar, or there's different codes. So if I put M in there, it knows that I want to choose Monday. There's different shortcut keys to quickly enter data. And I think you'll see that throughout the system is Microsoft is focused on helping people to be efficient in entering information. Now I can identify what was the change with that mod. So we'll say it was a $250,000 mod in terms of the contract and funded value. And now once I accept that mod here, what you're going to see is the overall job will get updated. So now it went to 9.9 million and 9.8 million funded. And when I go back to that work breakdown structure, you're going to see the same type of update here on that setup task. It allows you to track those type of changes in detail. The system automatically rolls it up to each successive level. If you have any type of documentation related to it, a couple things related to documentation. On any master record, you can take notes. So this is the place notes can be taken. I can send these notes off to somebody by hitting the notify button and selecting who I want to send it to, or I can just hit save, and now you can see the note itself, who took the note, when they took it. If you have any documents related to this, so that's first for notes. Now if you've got a document related to this, maybe you've got the email from the contracting officer, or you've got some other type of file associated with it, maybe the original contract file. If you use SharePoint, you can just drag and drop a document against the record. It'll put a link into SharePoint for you. If you don't use SharePoint, there's just a general link function, and it's going to allow you to associate a new document link to this record. So a great way to take unstructured data that sits outside the system and associate it with it. We're in a world today where information is collected in different places. So whether it's through email or documents sent, it's a great way to associate documents to those records. So now we've set up the main project structure. We've defined the work breakdown structure. You've got overall funding and contract value. Now in terms of charging to these particular levels, what you're able to do is define for each level, is this particular charge code visible for time entry, visible for expense and requisitions, or both? And then the next thing is identifying actually who can see this. And one of the great things here is this data is integrated in real time with the time entry system. So all the time entry administration is done inside of the accounting system, and there is no manual step to integrate it or rekey it. The first point of integration is related to the membership. So this is actually who can charge to that particular level in the WBS. You can assign a team. That team can be assigned to the overall project or to just certain charge codes within the project. And then in addition, there is the ability to identify within a period of time when someone can see that particular charge code. Same concept in terms of time and expense approval. You're defining who is available to approve those particular charge codes. This gives you an unlimited number of levels in terms of who can be involved in approving both time, expense, and requisitions. So now at this point, we've got a project set up. We've defined who can charge to it, the periods they can charge to, and now we can talk a little bit about setting people up to make those actual charges. Before we go there, I'm going to talk about a couple different other project setups or job setups. The first is related to budgeting and forecasting. We won't go deep into this, but this is the place that you can identify budgeted hours for the project. Once you budget all of your direct costs, so both labor hours, materials, lodging, subcontractors, etc., the system can calculate what the indirect burden would be based on the direct cost identified. And then based on the type of project, the system can also identify what the projected fee would be. So on a cost plus fixed fee, that would be the fee identified. If you're in a scenario where it's T&M, it'll calculate it based on that bill rate in terms of the revenue. There's import-export from Excel, and also the ability to have an unlimited number of budgets set up. So you can have your baseline budget, and then the revision to the budget would be your estimate to complete that cost budget. As the system, or as things change within the project, you can update that ETD budget. So in addition to defining budgets, you also have the ability to define funding limits. So the system automatically uses the funding caps that you've identified in those charging levels, and you can see these identified here. But you can also identify additional funding caps. So you can cap, in this example, we've got a cap on fee. You could cap things by labor category code, or a cap on G&A dollars that can be recovered. This gives you the ability to identify all the caps from a billing perspective. Last thing before we go on to the next project is I want to talk a little bit about alerts. And alerts are triggered emails that can be sent based on a condition being met. You have the ability at any level of the WBS to compare either the spent or billed value to the funded or budgeted value and trigger an alert at a certain percentage. So everybody typically knows what funded and budgeted are. Billed means you've generated the invoice. What spent means is that the actual costs have been incurred, which would identify what would be planned to be billed even before you generate the invoice. So for example, when someone records time on a timesheet and that time has been saved, it hasn't been processed through accounting yet, but actually you've incurred that labor cost. So the system will take that into account, and it can compare it against the funded or budgeted value, trigger an alert at a certain percent, send it to the PM, task manager, or just to alternate email addresses. So a great way, if you have short-run projects or you're at the end of a project, to be more proactive in terms of where you are in terms of consuming that total funded or budgeted value on a project. So I think as companies try to be more of a real-time reporting, that gives them the kind of information to make decisions on the fly and not have to wait till the end of the timesheet period or the end of the accounting period. So that's a little bit about setting up a project that's cost type. I want to spend a couple minutes on T&M work. I'm sure that we've got some folks on the phone that do work time and material for the government or the commercial markets. And we'll talk about some of the unique things here before we get into time and expense entry. Same concepts in terms of general posting and contract tab, but now when you've got a project that's a T&M project, the billing, instead of it being on cost type principles, is based on T&M labor rates. So under setup, you can see resource pricing. This is where you can see in the system what are the bill rates particular to this job by labor category and effective date. So you're able to see all of your escalating T&M rates through time. You don't need to set a reminder to go back and update the T&M labor rates. You can just set them for the future, and you can see all those labor rates for this particular job. If I want to look at one particular labor category, I can just set filters. So you're going to see this concept of filters throughout. This list is already filtered by job 2025. I want to also filter it by labor category code. So I'm going to filter for my senior developer labor category code, and you can see through time what the bill rate was in the past, what it currently is, and what it's going to be in the future. The next thing is identifying, we've already identified who's working on the job, but I can set their default labor category code for the work being performed on this job. So if I go to my resource labor category list, this is, for this job, the defaults for labor category code. So if I want to look at senior developers on this job, here's my list, Tom Clancy, and actually I guess in this case I myself am going to be a senior developer on this job. So I'm going to pull from my experience from 25 years ago. Now if I look at the combination of labor category code bill rates with the people, now it's going to tell the system what rate Tom Clancy is going to bill at on this particular project. Anytime you want to send the data to Excel from a list or a ledger, you can use this function to send to Excel, or you can see that there's a shortcut key here that says, or I can type in Control-E. So if I hit Control-E on my keyboard, it's going to actually take that data, put it into Excel, and now we're going to open up that Excel sheet. A couple things that you see in Excel is, number one, I see the date that this was sent across and also the time, and it automatically sets all these filters for me. So if I wanted to set additional filters, and where I wanted to see maybe certain values of the T&M bill rates, or I sent it for all periods, I want to see just certain periods, I can do that with the filters in Excel. If I wanted to add additional data, I can actually enter it right in Excel. We'll put in 3 future years of T&M bill rates for the job in this labor category. I can actually do that work in Excel. I can copy it, and we'll go back into NAV. I'm going to right-click, and we'll actually paste that row in here. So when it pastes the data, just a little heads up here, is that it actually enters the data just like it would if someone was hand keying it in there. So for example, if I made a mistake and I had, I was trying to put a bill rate in for 2029 and there's already one in there, it would actually give me an error message and tell me that that record already existed. Or if the job, labor category code, or it wasn't a valid date, all would give me errors. So anytime you're in Excel where it's a list entry, you can actually enter it in Excel and copy and paste it in. And it's just like you're entering it in real time. In addition, I guess one last thing is, if I wanted to refresh this list, I could actually hit refreshed, and it would pull in whatever the latest data is. So if you had anything that you did an analysis one time, you wanted to refresh it with new data, that refresh function would bring in whatever the latest information is. So that's a little bit about setup when we talked about a cost type and T&M project. Now let's get into a little bit about, as an employee or as a subcontractor, how I would be entering time. And what it all starts out with is you have resources that are set up in the system. These resources can either be employees and attached to an employee card, or they can be a subcontractor or a consultant. And you can see all the login information along with their working calendar and other setups are defined inside of NAV, which is going to drive the time entry and expense entry system. So as an employee, I would log into the time entry system. The system supports unlimited number of options in terms of what that calendar looks like. I can see on my timesheet information regarding my PTO balance. So the PTO categories are defined by the customer, so you can define if you've got just PTO, there is no vacation and sick time, you can identify that. And then you can also identify the accrual rates inside the system. Employee is going to see whatever my current PTO balance is. If they need to request time off, they can go through the request function, ask for time off for a future period, save it, and when they do that, submits a request to their approver, where their approver can accept or reject that time off request. In addition, as an employee, I can set certain favorites. So these would be charge codes that I typically work on every period. I can add and remove from this list as needed. Once I start a new timesheet, it's going to automatically default to charge codes that are on my favorite list, and then I can go to the day that I worked. So for yesterday, if I worked on Project Kempster all 8 hours in the day, I can enter my time here. If I need to enter a comment, select the comment and enter that here. Click OK and save it. That's going to be the daily process I go through as the user of the time and expense system. Once I get to the end of my pay period, or my timesheet period, I should say, I'm going to click my Submit button, and this is going to be the certification of my timesheet, and then it's going to send an email off to my approver. We've got a couple days left in the timesheet period, so I'm going to just go ahead and save that to a different day. As a user, once I finish that process and I submit it, it turns my timesheet from a draft status to a submitted status and locks it down and prevents me from making any type of entries. The system also has certain controls in place for things like if I try to enter time in advance on a direct charge project, I'm going to get, I guess today's Thursday, so if I try to enter on Friday and save it, it's going to let me know that I can't enter time in the future. So once I hover over that, it says future time not allowed on that type of charge code. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll zero that out because I can't enter time for tomorrow. Also, it has controls in place that if I try to change a previously saved cell, so for instance, I tried to save the 16th, I actually worked 5 hours on that job. Now it's going to require that reason for a change. So the type of controls that the government looks for in electronic timekeeping systems, they're all built into the application. Touch a little bit on the expense. Tell me I didn't save that change, so I'm just going to say OK and save it. And we'll go over to the expense side and talk a little bit about creating expense reports. So to create an expense report, I would just hit Add New Expense Report, and I'm going to identify the period of time that I traveled. So in this example, we'll say from the 26th to the 30th was my travel period, and this was for travel to Colorado. Click Save, and now it's going to create my expense header for me. And now I can add individual lines to my expense report, or I could use the per diem wizard as a way to create the expense report. So we'll identify that travel was to Colorado, and we actually went to Denver. You can type in, or you can just use the drop-down boxes. Once I click Next, I'm going to choose how long I was in that particular location. So we'll identify that it was for the full period of the trip. What was the job, the WBS for that particular travel, the lodging code, and these codes, they map to GL accounts inside the system. So as an end user, I just choose the code. I don't need to worry about what account that maps to. My meals were based on per diem. I click Next, and now it shows me that grid that identifies the different meals and incidentals and lodging. So for instance, if breakfast was included with lodging or breakfast was provided by the customer, I could uncheck one of those codes. I click Next, and finally I'll put in what my room rate was, the amount of tax, finish, and now it's going to create my expense report for me. So it does a couple of things. One is the 75% first day and last day on the per diem. You can see it splits out my lodging and tax. If I went over the ceiling, it would move that remainder into an unallowable account unless I could get that approved. Finally, I'm going to go ahead and save this. If I had some type of attachment, I could identify the attachment and, again, drag and drop it onto this particular expense report. And then once I finish with the expense report, I would hit submit, and then this would kick off the workflow approval for that expense report. One of the things that's great is as I was entering that information, as I look back into the accounting system, you'll see that in real time that expense report was actually created. So we'll go ahead and open that document. You can see all the details here, including the fact that this is submitted for approval, but it hasn't gone through the approval process yet. One of the questions that often comes up here is regarding when do those costs actually hit the general ledger. So what happens is these expenses, they're going to sit on this expense report until someone turns it into a purchase invoice. That purchase invoice is, in essence, a commitment until you actually post it. So the act of posting it is going to hit the general ledger, project ledger, and then it'll hit the AP side to identify that the employee is owed money on that expense report. So there's no rekeying of information. The workflow gives you the ability to identify who is going to approve expense reports. They're going to get notified through email and then go in to approve that expense report. So we've entered those expenses. They come in seamlessly to the accounting system. And now let's talk a little bit about the time entry process. So time got entered. We submitted it, or we actually didn't submit it, but we will submit it. It'll get approved. And then once that approved time is available, then you can bring it into the time journal for time processing. Before we do that, typically we're running the missing time report, and this report is going to give us visibility of, who hasn't entered time, what time hasn't been approved or submitted yet. In addition to running this report, I can also export it out to PDF, Word, or Excel, or in addition, schedule it. So we talked earlier about this whole idea of scheduling reports. It's a way as a user that I can schedule it for a future period in time, and then it'll actually show up in my report inbox. So maybe I want to, at the end of the night, people have to have their time submitted by 10 a.m. What I could do is I could run this missing time report and schedule it for as of, whoops, go back to that, run it as of 10:30 on the 1st, and then it'll just show up on my inbox. So it's just a way that I can do some work and not have to be there to actually run that report. So once you run the missing time report, there's no magic to getting them to enter the time, so you just need to call, email, whatever it might be. Once everyone has that time entered, we import it into the journal and then calculate the labor distribution. So that's going to calculate the per hour rate based on if the person's salaried or hourly. System supports both standard rate and effective rate and dilution methods there. Once all of those processes have been run, now I'm going to review it inside of the time journal summary report. So this is going to give me the details of what happens before I post this. So when I review it, I'll see the details from an employee perspective, what their base pay rate is going to be, whether they're salaried or hourly, the hours that they worked, total value of those hours, what is the summary by project, so what's going to happen in terms of project costing there, and then what is the overall GL impact when I go to post this. So before I post it, if you use the Dynamics NAV payroll system, this time before posting would be sent to payroll for processing. If you use an outside firm, ADP, Paychex, Payroll Network, other payroll providers, we've got some standard integration with those organizations to generate the files, to start the process for processing payroll. Then once you complete that, you can post this. It's going to hit all those ledgers that were identified in the time journal summary in real time. If subcontractors use your timesheet, you can actually generate subcontractor invoices that you could match against the invoice that the subcontractor or consultant sends you. So now that takes us through that cycle of setting up a project, collecting time and expenses, processing those different types of charges. So the last piece too, when you think about the job side of it, is you've got your direct costs. Now let's talk a little bit about the indirect costs. So I'm going to go to my cost pool setup. Let's talk a little bit about how indirect rates are set up and the management of those rates. So this step in the system is all configuration related, because for each company, their chart of accounts could be unique, their indirect rate structure can be unique. So step one is you're first defining what is your rate structure. So in my demo example, I've got a fringe, 2 overhead pools, both company site and client site, and a G&A pool. This indirect rate setup is for both your intermediate or service centers and final pools. So they're all set up within the same structure. The only requirement really is on the sequence side, if you've got an intermediate pool, you've got to have that in a sequence above wherever costs, if they're loaded into another account, to be picked up for a final pool, you have to have that in a sequence above. So in this example, our fringe is an intermediate pool, and it's in a sequence above our overhead and G&A pools. So now for each of the individual pools, once the structure is set up in the sequencing, now for each pool you're identifying what is the pool cost and base. So in this demo example, my overhead client site pool is made up of a range of my overhead accounts for departments that are client site departments. So client site, this is just a range of departments. My overhead accounts is a range of GL accounts. So if I go into what is made up of my overhead accounts, it's from account 7,000, which is the start of my overhead expenses, all the way through 7,700, which is my fringe that got allocated into overhead from that intermediate pool. So now that's how I'm defining what's in my pool. Same idea with base. You're going to have a range of accounts that's going to be leveraged in terms of what is the base to create that ratio. The next step is, once you've defined your pool and base, to tell the system, once you've accumulated those costs, or the cost allocated. So do the costs actually go out to projects, or if it's an intermediate pool, it would actually go into different GL accounts? And then in this example, once those costs are accumulated, they're being allocated out to projects at both an actual rate and a provisional rate. So those costs are hitting both the general ledger and the project ledger at actual and provisional. And we'll show you a little bit about what that looks like. Then finally, you've got your provisional rate that you've been using for allocations and billings. Again, date sensitive, giving you a place to identify the provisional rate for billings and allocations. And once you get that final rate, you can plug that in. The allocations are just done through a process. So typically monthly, you're running the allocate cost function, and this is going to take those accumulated costs from the general ledger, then perform those allocations based on those setups we identified. At the end of that process, I'll show you a little bit about what those allocations are going to look like. We're going to go into our chart of accounts, and just a couple things to highlight here. So for folks that use GCS Premier on the call, the chart of accounts is going to be a little different than GCS. Instead of the account number containing both the job and department code, those are actually stored at the transactional level. So it gives you a lot of power and flexibility related to reporting, and also in terms of managing your chart of accounts, much less complicated. So if I look at any one of these particular accounts, and I'm going to highlight 2 of them, and what I'm looking at is my overhead, 2 projects, company site actual and offset, and you can see they net to 0. So for each one of these pools, we actually have 4 allocation accounts, the actual and provisional, with the offset to those. And when I drill into it, what you're going to see is the detail of what was in that allocation. So when I drill into this, you saw the total amount, and that amount is made up of, for each department and task, whatever the rate was times the base, giving me the amount that was allocated. So you can see not only the amount, but how that amount was derived in terms of the mathematics of it. So it makes it easy for people to understand and spot if there's any type of issues related to the allocation. So now we've got all costs that have been accounted for, both direct costs and indirect costs. Now, in terms of other types of month-end processes, let's talk a little bit about billing, because when we look at the key challenges companies face, I think they typically fall into three categories. One is there's too much that you're doing manually. That thought. So the first thing is related to automating things that are manual. Number two is oftentimes reporting. Getting the right kind of information to finance and operations in more of a real-time fashion. So that's typically the second challenge. And then the third challenge is often around either integration. So if you've got more than one system you use, how easily can these systems talk to each other? Or related to ease of use. So those are the typical challenges. We've talked a little bit about things that show how to improve reporting. You can see throughout the ease of use. Now let's talk about some of those manual things you might be doing, including indirects could be manual. So to generate invoices, I can the create invoice function. I can also schedule this to be run. And what I'm doing is for a particular job, and also there's this concept of billing group. And what billing group allows me to do is, on a particular job, if you remember this one, there was multiple tasks that we had. So in this example, we had 4 different tasks that had been identified. If all 4 tasks are billed together, when I go to create this invoice, I would just have one billing group. But in my example, there's multiple billing groups because each one of the tasks gets billed separately. So if you want to group certain tasks together, you can set up a billing group to create one invoice for that particular task set. Then I'm identifying what is the period I want to run this invoice for, whether I'm using my final rate or provisional rate, and then again, whether you schedule it or run it now, either is an option. Once I run that, it creates what we call an invoice proposal or a worksheet. So this is the place that I'm going to go to actually create that review form to determine is everything accurate and looking the way that we expect it to. Once I create it, I'm going to print a sample of the invoice. In terms of how you want to view the information, category group, what that means is different types of expense categories. So whether you group your, my labor section, I've got my materials, travel, indirects, fee, etc. That's what a category group is. Category group plus labor type allows you to split your subcontract labor from your direct labor. So if you split the labor section out, you can select that option. If you group it together, you would just choose category group. And then cost and fee is combining all those cost elements together and just showing them as one group. So if you roll your indirects in there to the directs, it's going to, create all those costs together. In terms of the labor side, whether you summarize by resource or labor category, you would choose that option. Once you define for a job how you want to print it, you can just save these setups, and now the system is going to automatically default them for you every time you go to print an invoice for a particular job or job task combination. So now, again, I can print it, PDF, Word, Excel, or I can just do an online preview. So from this online preview, a couple things that I want to highlight. One, I'm showing up top the billing period of performance for this particular work. When I go down to the body, I'm looking at information about who we're billing, contract data, so primary contract number, information about funding. And then when you see the body, we selected by resource, so it's showing the person's name and labor category code. We've got all of our labor for this particular task, materials, travel, my burdens, fee, total for the overall job. And again, even afterwards, I can export it if needed. So once I've created that document, if it needs to get approved, you can send it as an approval request, And this leverages SharePoint. It drops that document into SharePoint, sends an email to, in this case, the project manager, and the project manager can approve or reject that invoice. Once you get that approval process, the status is going to change from a pending approval to a release status. And I can go ahead and post that document, and then it becomes a posted invoice. And then I could print it, email it, and you can see I can print it as many times as I need to. In addition to printing it on the different standard formats, cycle from setting up projects through collecting time and expenses. I'm going to cover one last topic, and then we're going to take a couple questions. So the last topic is, we've talked a lot about the project side of it. I want to touch on two elements related to the financial side of it. And those are going to be related to the budget side of it and then also financial reporting. So related to budgets, a couple key things. One is you can have an unlimited number of financial budgets. The project budgets actually can be loaded to financial budgets if needed. So if you do a bottoms-up budget, you could budget by project, copy it over to the financial side. You also have the ability to import-export budgets from Excel. So if you wanted to send out a budget to each of your department heads, send that budget to Excel, and then they could fill it out in Excel, then you can actually import that information. Or you could create budgets from history, both general ledger history or budget history. And those budgets can actually be either the exact copy. You're going to typically compress them because you don't, if you're recording costs, GL history by day, you don't want to necessarily have the budget by day, but you can compress it to a month or quarter. And then you also have an adjustment factor. So if you project to have 15% growth, you could actually take last year's actuals, adjustment factor of 15%. That's going to give you that baseline budget, and you can adjust it as needed from there. So you've got some robust budgeting capabilities that you can leverage on the financial side. Then the last thing I just want to end up with is we talked a little bit about financial reporting, and I want to talk a little bit about some of the capabilities here in terms of building or enhancing the existing financial reports. The way that the financial reports are built is it's built in a way that, again, for financial savvy people, looks and feels like Excel. You just define a row, give it a description, and tell the system where does the data come from a posting account, a totaling account. So this is just a GL account or a range of GL accounts. And a formula. You can build your own formulas inside of the financial reports, different formatting options. Then I'm telling the system this row, if it's an income statement type of report, you're going to have net change, which means any filters someone sets in the financial reports, so filters by periods, and it could be any range of periods, by department, by project. You just want to show that information based on that filter. And then if you get balance sheet information, balance at date, beginning balance. And then in terms of visibility, always show this particular row, never show it, only show if it's not zero. So you've got the flexibility to build the rows in your financial statements. Then the columns, this gives you the ability to create different column layouts. So whether the column layouts are comparing general ledger, current period history, or previous history, comparing those things to budgets, create variances. You can create different formulas related to any type of the columns. Again, similar concept, formulas, net change, different balances, current period, prior periods. This comparison date formula, if I want to look at last year, same period, I could put -1Y, look at last month. So it really gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of how you want to view this. If you wanted to see your columns as departments, so each department or division is a column, you can use the department code totaling formulas or project code totaling formulas. So we covered a lot of different stuff just to give people an idea of overall general capabilities. And Damon, I know we've got a handful of questions that we want to cover.
We do. We're short on time, so Paul, I'll let you go through and take a look at some of those questions.
All right.
Pick ones that you can answer quickly. We do have some other.
Okay. All right. We only have, it looks like, about a minute.
Yeah.
So the first question that I'll cover is regarding the size of company. So the question, what size of company is the system a good fit for? And really, it's a range. So we've got clients that start off about 10 million in revenue, and we've got clients that are over $1 billion in revenue. So I think one of the unique things about the system is it's got ease of use for smaller companies, but it's got deep capabilities for bigger companies. Let me see if I can just pick a couple smaller. There's some long questions, and those ones we'll email you back or call you back on. Second one is about cost. What is the cost in the licensing model? So the cost is dependent, one, on the licensing model that you choose. So we have both a purchase model where you can purchase, you pay annual maintenance. We've also got a rental model where it's like a monthly cost. So those are significantly different. And then really the cost depends on the size of your business and the number of concurrent users. And what we'll do is, for the couple people that asked about cost, we'll contact you to discuss that, because it's really dependent on your organization. But the difference, as compared to Deltek in particular, is that it's based on concurrent user versus employee headcount. So several other questions, but I guess we ran out of time. Yep. But I just want to say thank you for investing a little time with us. If you have an interest in an in-person presentation, we're going to reach out to all the folks that have been on the call, and we're happy to have a follow-up with you there.
Absolutely. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much.